First review in almost a week, and somehow I've ended up back where it all began. The old studio. Yeah, I've done some work here over the past year ever since I left it, but let's face it, it's something that I've kept as storage, and I like to come back here every so often just to sort of, remember the roots. And we definitely are remembering our roots today with today's album review. We're talking about the Headless Ritual, the newest and probably one of the best albums that you're going to hear not only this year, but from this band, the band Autopsy. Now, you may think that based around that introduction, you can pretty much turn off the album review right now because you know that this album is amazing, this is great, but we're going to talk about it a little bit more in depth. And we're going to talk about the band a little more in depth for those of you who are viewing this like, wait, Autopsy are actually doing things? They're still a band? Well, yeah, this is actually their second album ever since they decided to get back together. After Abscess decided that it was going to no longer do material, Autopsy decided that they were going to come back. They came back with an album a few years ago entitled MACABRE ETERNal, which I reviewed here on this channel. And now they're back with the Headless Ritual. They've also released 2 EPs during that time frame as well that I didn't touch, but that's because the full lengths are probably the best to touch in this situation. 10 fresh new tracks full of gore. Now, we don't have an 11-minute long track like we did on MACABRE ETERNal, but we really don't need it. This is filled with the same snarling, just dirty vocals, the same soaring guitars, the murky, doomy elements, the death metal, gory glory that Autopsy have been providing for us ever since the latter part of the 1980s. It's funny how 16 years really just seemed to make the band grow and become even better whenever MACABRE ETERNal came out a couple of years back. Well, imagine that now on steroids. Imagine them taking all of the elements that they really used to make that album such a bloody good time and just slapping a little bit more onto that cadaver. Basically, imagine yourself in the bottomless pit that is the darkest and murkiest basement. There is a naked body there that has now been disemboweled, and you are taking part in all of the activities that are centered around it. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that that's the best metaphor that can be used for this album. However, it kind of gets you in the spirit of what Autopsy's all about. Gory vocals, very sick, twisted, depraved, images that you're getting from the words that are being spoken. And the music just fits it so well. The one thing that you can sometimes say about either grindcore or gorecore or things like that is that there's definitely an element placed on the atmosphere, the musical atmosphere, and sometimes whenever you hear acceleration of that, you can kind of understand the madness, the insanity that's going in and through somebody's mind, perhaps whenever these depraved actions are taking place. And let's face it, these are probably some pretty rare actions, though I'm sure they've happened in some way, shape, or form, at least in some particle of history, because let's face it, we live in a world where some pretty sick shit comes up, not just in our minds, but also in our society. But the one thing that really is not kind of documented is the doomier element, the slower portions of the insanity, the parts where the insanity actually kind of takes a step back and breathes a little bit and kind of develops that sinister carnal sneer, the one thing that defines us from all other animals, but in the same way transforms us into something that could be seen only as pure evil and animal. It's a beautiful thing, and it's something that Autopsy infuses into their music, and they do so more than ever on this album. Overall, this carnal slab of carnage is just absolutely awesome to the ear. This is something that if you have somebody who's, not very familiar with death metal vocals, you almost want to, give them this first. It's going to be way too much for them to handle, but at the same time, it essentially prepares them for just about everything that they're going to encounter throughout their journey in the metal universe. It's one of those things where you almost have to start them off with the most extreme. That way they can appreciate that which is not as extreme. Now, granted, your idea and your opinion of what's the most extreme is probably going to be different. However, you must admit that this is certainly a fitting example of that thing. And that trait is certainly a pure example why Autopsy, one of the founders, they are certified as one of the true forefathers of the death metal scene, are really one of the bands that are just going to be unforgettable after they do finally decide to call it quits. And this album's another prime example as to why that is. The songwriting is just destructive. The songwriting, though, however, also has a fluidity to it. Even though these guitar tones and everything sound absolutely just insane, almost as though there's very little rhyme or reason placed in there, everything has its place. Every tortured cry, every soaring guitar solo, the bass thump to the drum line, everything has a perfect position. And these combinations have been expertly crafted in order to create a record that not only is able to influence your own frame of mind, but also sets the atmosphere. It basically gives you the setting and the feeling of everything that this album allows you to experience. And for that reason, we are very thankful, principally because that's why it's going to probably be destined to be one of the best albums of the year. Now, I'm not saying this album is going to take a top spot or anything like that, because we've had a lot of albums that we've been looking at over the course even of just the past month that definitely have a certain worthiness to them. Of course, we just spoke about Orphan Land, but this is a completely different animal. This is a completely different realm or universe in the entirety of metal that really is showcasing what it's capable of doing. It's almost like, if you want to go back to the Animal Kingdom metaphor, you have, one leader of the jungle, you have one element of the jungle showcasing what it brings to the table, and then another comes up that's completely different and says, well, hey, I got this. Kind of like a lion roaring and then maybe a bear growling. It's an interesting thing, and it's definitely one that Autopsy shows with real bravado on this album. Gory, damning bravado. If you played this for a Christian, they'd probably want to douse themselves in altar wine and eat communion about 75 times. If you play this for a Satanist, they'd be looking around for, a goat lord. If you played this for a Hindu, I don't know what the hell would happen, but this metaphor's gone too far. This album's good. That's basically all I have to say. Actually, this album's great. I should really upgrade that, because good just is not a good enough adjective, really, in order to describe it. It has a lot of fantastic qualities and things that you definitely want in a nice, depraved record, something that you can blast, and for some strange reason, in that deep, dark recess of your mind, the part of you that you try to ignore, you feel real good. Pick up this record. It's definitely well worth it, and it's definitely fitting of the Autopsy name. You would expect nothing less from these guys. They have delivered in leads. 9 out of 10. It's good to be back. Fucking heavy metal, man. Listen to it.